Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile 2 video, and I wanted to make like a preliminary tier listing of the higher performing minion builds that I expect to see in 0.4. And obviously this is without having all of the information that we're going to get in the coming days, especially the skill tree changes as well. So we'll have a look at that, and then obviously we'll pop out a proper tier list, but I think this might actually be on point. So here's a preliminary tier list for the minion builds as of now. Before we dive into the video, I would appreciate if you hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and leave a comment down below. It helps the YouTube algorithm tons. I appreciate you guys supporting this channel in those matters. Let's crack into it. I'm simply just going to go from what I think is going to be S tier, and I'm going to go through the A tiers and a couple of honorable mentions. So I'm going to start with what I think is going to be the best and go from there, because some people just want to watch whatever I think is the best and then don't give a fuck about the rest of the video. So let's get you guys sorted. I think Spectres is one of the top tier performing builds as of 0.3. And I think that's going to be the case for 0.4. In the patch notes, they did rip off, sadly, our frozen mandibles, also known as the cocaine ants. However, there's a text saying that they're going to buff some Spectre variants of certain monsters, and we're going to get details on this in patch notes before the release that might change this. But let's assume that they are not nerfing anything, since they did specifically say that we'll write the word buffed. So I don't think we'll see any nerfs to Vol Guards as a result of this. But let's pretend that none of these are actually going to change the top shift of meta Spectre choices. That means that we are very likely going to be using powered zealots to perform both for clearing and single target. If you're only looking for the top tier single target Spectres, those would be Death Knights, and for clearing, weapon swapping strategies with the approach of Brine Maidens, I think would be the play. However, I did speak to GGG a couple of days ago, and they are well aware of the lingering Spectre bug / exploit, or whatever you want to call it. Which is actually the best way to play minions as a 0.3, which I thought they were going to fix really fast, but they didn't. So it is very likely going to be a case where they fix this. If they don't, I'll make a guide on it, obviously. I know Oscrix has a really cool video explaining this in detail, so a big shout out to Oscrix to check his content out for this specifically, but hopefully this will be fixed, which I believe it will be. So that means that if we then assume that lingering Spectres will be gone, we're then going to be looking at powered zealots and potentially any of these newly buffed Spectres, but I think powered zealots will be the play. When it comes to ascendancy choices, I definitely think that we're going to see something like the Shaman. And the reason for that is actually quite straightforward. They have the Sacred Flow notable. It gives you 40 spirits for each available empty charm slot. You are sacrificing your charm slots for this, but that is 40 spirits. By the end of Act 2, with the new change to the Valley of Titans quest in Act 2 that gives you a charm slot, you can actually get +2 charm slot belt drops as of area level 30. Well, from rares from 28 and magic monsters from 29, but 30 plus any belt can roll +2 charm slots. That gives you 120 charm slots by sacrificing your charm slots to not using charms. And that's a lot of spirit early on, making the Shaman one of the more solid early game league starter approach for any type of minion builds that uses spirit. So not unearth or zombies and stuff like that. So that puts it at a really comfortable spot. But we also saw that we have some pretty interesting notes from the Oracle. Now keep in mind that both of these images are images that GGG sent out to media outlets about a week ago, and they've also confirmed that there will be changes to them. How big those changes will be, if it's only numerical or if they're changing big things, we have no idea. So again, this is only a preliminary tier list based off what we know so far and what we've seen. So I think that the Oracle looks rather interesting, because recently we got access to this little picture, which I made a video on rather recently, showcasing some rather interesting stuff, which is showing a lot of minion nodes, which brings me to the point where I think that the Shaman might be a very solid starter for Spectres, but in the end game, you're very likely switching over to respecking that Shaman ascendancy into an Oracle. So that is very likely my league starter as well, but that's what I think is going to be the S tier choice for Spectre builds. Obviously, we still have the classic way of playing Infernalist. We still have the very juicy way of playing Ritualist with triple ever-grasping rings, for example. And we also have the super high-end version of Lich. And I do believe that we're going to be in a similar boat, pending the node power from the Oracle, where the Lich might actually be the best of these when it comes to super high-end min-max gear, and the Infernalist being like the mediocre low-budget approach, end-game build that just does everything extremely well, is now going to compete directly with the Shaman. So I think that I'll be playing the Druid because I'm very excited for that personally. But I think the Infernalist and Shaman are going to be somewhat on par in terms of low budget, medium budget, and high budget. But on the super min-max mirror tier, you're more wealthy in PoE than Elon Ma. I mean, it's just crazy, right? So then we are comparing the Lich versus the Oracle in that scenario. Both classes can respec if you get to that point into those if you want to. But I think the Shaman is seemingly the top contender. But again, I think that's what we're going to see with the Spectres. Moving on to the other S tier build is a classic. First time I saw this was actually from Ostrix. I was talking to Kriparian rather recently, and he has a really cool Titan version of this, which I believe he's starting off with a Smith of Kitava into Titan, which looks rather interesting because they've made statements saying that an energy shield was going to get nerfed. They've made statements of a bunch of other things that's going to happen that is not seen in the patch notes. So based on these statements, I think Crip might actually be onto something, and that is the Tamed Beast Righteous Fire build, where you're basically running around weapon swapping to move a big Tamed Beast, which is using Infernal Legion, which is just burning things around us. Now, the ES nerfs might make the Titan version the better approach for this build, so again, a shout out to Kriparian for that. And I also think that the less pack density in higher endgame maps lowers the value of massive AoE clearing that this build brought to the table. Though I still think that this build has a very solid single target output, and once you get it online, it just does very well on both low, medium, and high budget approaches, which is why I want to keep this as an S tier build. It also wasn't really touched too much in the patch notes of the offensive scaling part. However, if you do this as a Shaman, there are some interesting things you can do when you move over to the Oracle, because if you look at this passive tree, there are some nodes over here. This notable looks like the Vile Mending, which is a defensive node for minions. There's also minion HP nodes here, which it seems to be. Same thing here. And there's an entire cluster shaped like a heart. And if these things provide better defenses for minions to further scale the efficiency of damage output for your Tamed Beast using things like the HP scaling on minions in general, I think there are some options here that can be played around with, but time will tell when we have more information about this. But I still think that even with or without these things, that the Tamed Beast, Righteous Fire, or Infernal Legion is going to remain an S tier build. So moving over to the preliminary A tier builds, I think that the classical build of playing the Ritualist Skeleton Archer, where we're stacking Ever-Grasping Rings, is going to be definitely a solid choice. For those of you who don't know what Ever-Grasping rings look like. Can I get this on a wiki and not Vextra, please? Holy shit. Whatever. So the Ever-Grasping Ring is the allies in presence gain % of their damage as extra chaos damage, and enemies in your presence is getting extra chaos damage, which is why this is played with CI mostly to offset the extra chaos damage that you take. But this ring is a very solid approach for the Ritualist, as we can have 3 ring slots, for example. Another thing to point out is that any minion build that is using a lot of spirits, that means basically any build that is not using Radiant Spirits, Unearth, or Zombies, they are getting hit with the reduced reservation efficiency across the board with Ralakesh nerfs and a couple of other factors that's playing a role in this. So, I mean, that it doesn't affect the Ritualist Skelly Archer that much in general with the way it's played, since it's mostly stacking the approach of damage of these things with the triple rings. However, it also shines exceptionally well with higher endgame gear, and I do want to point out that the Ritualist is not a comfortable league starter for with minions, because it's not really recommended to level with minions unless you have twink gear. So you want to deck out your leveling character to level it with minions. So you kind of want to level with something else, and it takes off with more gear later on. So those are my kind of confirmed from my perspective with what we know so far in a preliminary tier list. So I wanted to bring in some honorable mentions, and I got 2 big ones that I'm very excited for. The first one is Raging Reavers. Essentially, it's Reavers stacking up as much rage as possible, simply because in the patch notes, this happened to it. And that is the attack speed per 2 rage, which was previously described on the gem but not functional. This is something that only takes effect if they're using the Enrage ability. So obviously you're going to have to make sure that they actually use the Enrage ability, which brings the problem of keeping them alive. But there's some other changes to this, such as the buff to Techrod's Revenge being a 20-second duration and double the attack cast speed from before. So this is something you could use. There's some shenanigans with an Umbilicus Immortalis belt you could play as well. The ascendancy choice, though, for this kind of depends on which type of rage-generating mechanic we go for and or the skill tree changes that we'll see here on the top left corner of the skill tree, because we might be doing this with some other ascendancies, like even Titan. We have Ritualist, Lich, Infernalist, Shaman, Oracle. There's so many options around this, but it all depends on those things. But it also kind of requires tech rod with the rage mechanic to be effective, if you ask me at least. So it kind of has to be played with something else till you get those things online. The other problem is obviously the survivability of the reavers and what numbers of damage output we can actually get out of this, which we won't know till launch day. But I wanted to bring them up as an honorable mention because I do think that they can perform quite well now that they fixed this approach when it comes to the reavers for their rage benefits. Keep in mind that you can give them extra quality through Diala's lineage support as well as quality themselves, which increases the effectiveness of rage on them, which will further increase the amount of damage they're doing when they have rage. It's going to be quite fun to see how they perform. The last honorable mention I have in this video is going to talk about Unearth and zombies. And the reason for this is because in the past, an empowered zombie is summoned by expending a power charge. Was doing 100% more damage. This is now scrapped, and instead of 100% more damage, it's a dynamic modifier, which starts at 122% more damage, and at level 20, it's 253% more damage. And that means that if you bring the level of race zombie even higher, it's going to deal even more damage when they're summoned through a power charge. Now, obviously, there's a couple of things around this. The first thing is that zombies never really struggled with doing damage. It just wasn't worth the hassle of generating power charges to utilizing them. But if they're doing this much damage, I think we're in a situation where they might be worth bothering. The other problem, though, with this is that they are a temporary summon minion, and unlike Unearth with quality that actually has the speed to keep up with you, because if they are temporary summon minions and you outrange them or run away from them, they disappear. Zombies are not that fast, and then therefore you need to have something else to use for the sake of clearing maps, and that's where Unearth comes into play for a build like this. And this is completely unaffected by the reduction of reservation efficiency for your spirit, since we are using temp summon minions. So I think that a build utilizing both Unearth for clearing and then getting a massive army of 10 or even 12 race zombies thanks to this node could do a stupid damage for single targets. I'm very excited for this. This might be one of those sleeper builds that could be a top performer. I'll be diving into this build specifically myself because I'm very excited for this. However, there's a couple of issues, obviously. But let's start with Ascendancy. I think that everlasting stuff, everlasting rings for the Ritualist is a very high contender as a top choice for this, simply because we don't really need that extra spirit that many of the other Ascendancy choices brings to the table, like the Smith, the Shaman, the Infernalist. And we also are in a position where the Evergrasping would benefit a lot from this, since they are physical damage dealing minions. We can very easily move in through Ulna Toll's Embrace, for example, which was also significantly buffed with 40% of physical instead of 20 as extra chaos damage, and therefore have a lot of armor break that way, which is a very, very attractive way of scaling damage. So I definitely think Ritualist is a top contender here, but there is some other problems with it as well. We have to generate power charges. And this can be done in a variety of different ways. I think that the most effective way would be to use the new lineage support that allows your offerings to generate a power charge to you once every 4 seconds, and you can do 2 of these, allowing you to have 2 power charges every 4 seconds, and also have support that makes the power charge that you gain be double, so you can actually get a pretty high average of power charge generation. We can use the skill Profane Ritual, which consumes a corpse to generate power charges, which can also be supported with ways for that to give you 2 charges per corpse. And we can use an aura skill called Sacrifice, which makes your permanent revivable skeleton or minions be treated as corpses, which you can then use Profane Ritual on to consume, which will then generate power charges to us. And an effective way to do this would be to have a couple of melee attacking revivable minions, like melee skeletons from the Rattling Scepter as an example, and then popping Profane Ritual on those, whilst having a couple of cleric skeletons in the background, which are ranged and not in range of your Profane Ritual, which will then immediately resurrect those skeletons, and therefore you can go play around with that a lot. The other problem that we need to PoB and theorycraft a lot before I dive into this is mana sustain. a fully supported race zombie with a Diala's Desire at level 30 will cost you about 300 mana per cast, which is a lot. So how do we solve this? The new lineage offering support that gives us power charges also gives us a mana regen and life regen, so that's kind of nice. It's not a solution, but it will help. There's the Essence Harvest, which will allow us to generate more mana to us in a recoup fashion by having a minions that has to support dying, which we can do by, again, Profane Ritual. But I think that in general, we need to look into either some sort of Mind Over Matter shenanigans, where our defense is our mana, so we can fully invest into that, because this is going to cost a lot of mana. The other approach we can play with is running some sort of hybrid life armor energy shield setup for defense and actually just speccing into something crazy as blood magic. By speccing into blood magic, we're now going to be having our spells cost life instead. And this would be easier to do in general, but now we have the problem of sustaining our life pool, which we can cover with energy shield to not die whilst doing this, but a life flask or life regeneration effects. But again, the skill tree and what we can do will dictate what kind of approach we'll do to do this, because the mana sustain is actually quite crazy, not just for zombies, but also the Unearth, which is a little cheaper than the zombies in this specific scenario. But I'm very excited for this, and those are my honorable mentions. And that's the kind of builds that I think is going to be the top performers as a 0.4 with the information we have right now. If you agree with me or disagree, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be checking out the comments, and as we know more, I'll hopefully have a more fine-tuned, refined, finalized tier list, an official tier list, as we move closer to the launch day. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more content, like the video and all that shit, and I'll see you guys in the next. Till then, stay safe and keep rocking.